All right. So good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this panel on the post-growth energy path. I'm Paolo Tomassetti from the University of Aix-Marseille, an associate researcher at TTUI. And it's my particular pleasure to chair this panel on the growth energy nexus. We will try to explore the role that energy might play to overcome the existing socioeconomic model and the attached to it, including the current energy crisis. We will seek to develop our discussion around a set of broad assumptions and research questions. We assume that the fossil fuel era was, and to some extent still is, the era of growth and the Anthropocene. While we will ask whether renewable energy might have a role in fueling a new socioeconomic model, one in which human activities are more attuned to nature and develop within the ecological boundaries. We will ask what institutions could allow renewable energy to be democratized and to be the cornerstone of a new, more democratic economic model beyond growth. In this connection, we will look at the energy transition as an opportunity to rethink existing socioeconomic model beyond growth. This, of course, would imply to challenge the illusion of infinite growth on a finite planet, shifting to the idea that natural resources and energy must serve societal purposes. We're all aware, however, that the transition away from fossil fuels is not straightforward. It comes with many contradictions and should not be idealized, as the current energy crisis demonstrates. So we will discuss these issues and many other related topics with four fantastic panelists on my left. We have Felix Maliel, which is a policy advisor on energy and climate change at the European Trade Union Confederation. Natalia Magnani, she is professor of environmental sociology at Trento University in Italy. Nick Mayen is Senior Policy Officer for Systemic Change at the European Environmental Bureau, and Thorfinn Steinfort, which is Senior Policy Advisor at the Institute for European Environmental Policy. So Thorfinn will open the panel with a discussion, a presentation of 15 minutes about a recent research that he has conducted on the distributional effects of the current energy crisis. And we will ask Thorfinn also to share not only the early outcomes of your research, but also the policy implications and what we can learn from actually your study. So I will give the floor to Thorfinn for his 15-minute presentation. After that, there will be reactions from the other panelists that will further fuel the discussion around the set of questions that we have agreed. And we basically have system of feedback among us, feedback and reactions among us to the main discussion that we'll try to promote in this panel. And then, of course, we will try to also fuel the debate from the audience and collect questions and further fueling our discussion. So, Thorfinn, the floor is yours.
Great. Thank you very much, Paolo. And thank you for having me here today for this very interesting event. So I will share a slides here. There we go. Right. So as mentioned, my name is Thorfinn Steenforth, and I'm working at the Institute for European Environmental Policy. And we are working across a wide range of environmental policies, but I'm focused, of course, on sort of climate policy. The work I'm sharing today, it should also be noted, is that we're working together with the Basque Center for Climate Change to do the modeling. And we're both members of this Think Sustainable Europe network of think tanks, which has members in many member states and non-member states around Europe to try to synergize our work on sustainability policy. One thing also to note before I get into everything is that these results are still fairly preliminary. We've just sort of done the initial run. So a lot of it will still need to be checked and double checked and calibrated and so on. But it's interesting maybe to share already some of these results, which will focus on the effects of the change in price over this last year in 2022 compared to 2021, basically. And what were the distributional effects of those changes. And we modeled it in individual member states as well as at EU level, sort of get a different picture. And it's based on a model that can also look quite closely at different types of households and different individuals. For example, rural and urban, large families, small families, and other socioeconomic indicators, which can give us sort of quite a granular look at what are the effects here, which is very important, of course, given the sort of very heterogeneous households we have across all of Europe in different member states and across member states. A little bit of background here just to explain the results, I think. What basically the results reflect are the different fuels that different households use, which of course varies considerably from member state to member state, and to some extent based on your socioeconomic status. And basically in every case here, we've divided it into the deciles, the income deciles of the countries, so ranging sort of from the poorest to the richest, to see how progressive or not progressive, regressive the effects are of these changes. One of the things that can kind of help to explain the different effects that we see is that, for example, electricity usage is very important, first of all, across most households because you use it all year long. It's generally used no matter what is the weather, no matter what your country. So it's usually a very important segment to explain the results. And it's also generally highly regressive, basically because you have to use it. There's no elasticity there. Versus heating is also fairly regressive, but not as much as electricity. And transport is a bit more complicated because here, in general, the poorest households actually spend less on transport than as a percentage of their income than wealthier households, with generally sort of the middle income being the most exposed to sort of transport prices. Wealthier households may be spending more as an absolute amount, obviously, but obviously they're sort of less dependent on it. So this is just to show here, this shows that heating is fairly regressive, with the poorest deciles spending more and the richest spending less. The fuels is transport, there's sort of a bit of a U shape there. And electricity is also, regressive, and also amounts to a higher percentage of income of the spending. Don't pay too much attention to this because it's a lot of data, but just to show that this is what we're basing the data on. So it's the increases in the costs of all these fuels. And you can see sort of natural gas, there's some very sort of shocking and high increases, as I'm sure we're all aware, but you see, you know, I mean, in Belgium, for example, where we are, it's 130% increase in the cost of natural gas over the last year, and across the board. But you do see, for example, in electricity, there can be quite a bit of variability in the different countries. Some have a much lower increase versus others. And on the transport side, it's a bit more even, but you do also have some variability there. So that's just to explain a little bit the background of the results there. And this also, it should be noted, I mean, these are just price increases, so we don't necessarily know why. I mean, there could be all kinds of policy reasons behind this, like if they've frozen the prices, tax reductions, et cetera, et cetera. So we don't know, and of course that's quite different from member state to member state. Now, basically, this is the sort of big picture across the EU, that we see that it's not that regressive in a way, the effects that have come through the effects of these price increases. But it a bit hides the picture maybe a little bit, because what we think that we're seeing here is essentially the price increases are much bigger in certain countries than in others. And it means that some of the poorest households, which maybe are in some countries that had not such high price increases, or maybe they saw increases, for example, on transport fuels, but not electricity and not natural gas. So this is hidden a little bit in the EU-wide household analysis. But if you look, if you look at individual countries, for example, Belgium, for example, Italy, where we've seen very high increases in electricity costs and in natural gas. Here, it's just fairly straightforward, regressive pattern that the poorest households are worst affected. But some other countries, it's not so clear. I mean, Poland, for example, you actually see more effect here on the higher end of the distribution.
Is this the effect of the price increase?
Yeah,
it's not the overall consumption of.
No, this is the difference from last year. So that's also important, of course. Yeah. And Denmark here, it's a little bit all over the map. I mean, as I said, we're still a little bit early in our analysis to exactly understand why this would be necessarily in every country. But in general, the effect is the more reliant you are on electricity and the more the price went up, the more regressive, and same with natural gas. Whereas in transport fuels, if you had a high increase in transport fuels, that maybe has a higher effect on the other end. So that'll affect there. Maybe just to go back to this is just showing the average effect across all households in the different member states. So also quite different from country to country. Here you see Belgium, Estonia, Lithuania, Netherlands having sort of amongst the worst effects, and some other countries less. Croatia, Hungary, Spain, for example, a bit less. Most likely you're seeing a bit of the effect of some of the policies adopted in those countries. But I mean, also, frankly, this could be a bit of incorrect, I mean, not fully correct data, and then not fully reported. So that's also another caveat there. But yeah, to be seen. And Malta, we have no data. That's right. Also, just another slightly non-surprising thing is that urban populations have tended to be less affected, and rural populations more. Yeah, so a little bit. That's. I mean, in a way, that's just sort of a big picture. What's happened according to our initial analysis. We have more data, like country by country and so on. So we're going to get into that and look into those more in our eventual report, which we're putting out, we hope, by March. And we hope to cooperate with a lot of the partners here on that and sort of distribute that and publicize the results and so on. One thing here also, just a little bit of publicity, let's say, but it's basically the same methodology that we did last year, looking at the same impacts here that we're talking about based on the proposed changes in the energy taxation directive and in the ETS reform, so the ETS2. So we have a report on that, which everyone can read, and it's sort of the same. I'm not really going to get into this now because it's not what we necessarily want to talk about here, but just to show what we also modeled there using sort of the same methodology, the policies that you can use to sort of counter these effects. Because of course, what we're talking about here now are the higher prices of energy, which was in a way part of the goal of some of those past policies. But of course, right now, we don't have the sort of countermeasures that were hopefully built into those in terms of sort of investment into households and infrastructure, and hopefully perhaps direct income support and so on. Also, as part of this, there's a lot of policy options that you have to alleviate the effects here that can be discussed. This is specifically geared to the ETD and the ETS, so I won't get into it. But just to name a few possible policy solutions here that we've also seen in response to the crisis. I mean, of course, now we see that there's a short-term crisis, so there's probably measures that are needed to respond to that. And a longer term, which I mean, I guess we're a little bit interested in here on the panel, a more longer-term solution to these issues, because right now we're in an emergency situation. Okay, maybe you have to follow some policies that are not optimal from a longer term point of view, but can sort of alleviate some of the social problems. But basically what our work shows is that, I mean, as we just mentioned, electricity is extremely important and extremely regressive. So when you're taxing electricity, this is, regressive. So the more you can do essentially on electricity taxation reduction, the better. And that's of course proposed now in the energy taxation directive, the new one. So that's an extremely important element to maintain in the longer term, but also in the shorter term. Whereas conversely, sort of transport fuel taxes are the opposite a little bit, and so we shouldn't be relying on that too much. Although it's of course a little bit complicated depending where you live, because there's a lot of rural reliance on driving and so on. So that's an important factor that needs to be taken into account for countervailing measures. But in general, you could say that. VAT reductions, we also find to be quite useful, and that's sort of one of the most common tactics that's being taken right now. So that's a good sort of short-term measure. Maybe in the longer term, not so useful, but short term, yes. The windfall taxes, I think that in general, we can all sort of agree that that's an effective possible measure for financing a lot of these, which are extremely expensive, generally speaking, for the budgets of the countries involved, particularly the more poorer countries, basically. So that's important. We're also going to be looking into these lump sum payments to citizens and price caps. We haven't actually modeled that yet, so it's hard for us to say like exactly what the distributional effects are, but that is coming in our work. I mean, it seems that obviously those are effective, but one problem is that they don't encourage energy saving, and that's another big priority at the moment. So that's quite problematic. If I just say, I mean, that's sort of the short term. On the longer term, of course, we need to be increasing renewable energy penetration across the market, because now the cost there is so much lower, broadly speaking. And I think also of interest, I think potentially for this panel, is that we also have found that energy communities and sort of local ownership is critical, an absolutely critical matter for the socioeconomic impact of all of these renewable energy. If you don't have that, then you're really missing out 90% of the benefit, basically. Even if you are manufacturing relatively locally, or at least sort of nationally, that's important, but not as important at all as local ownership, we find. So that's something that needs to be really emphasized, I think, much more than has been until this moment. Of course, that was enabled in the most recent Renewable Energy Directive, but the member states need to be emphasizing that much more now. And that also has been a big hedge against high prices. So very important. Maybe also just one other thing, just to mention, a lot of the other work we've done is on green taxation, which is also a sort of super underutilized tool, generally speaking, in the EU, and is also generally associated with more progressive tax systems and a more equal distribution of revenue or income in a country. So we think that's a missing tool, especially in Central and Eastern Europe, where it's so far not that much used. And in the recent national NRRPs, it was really not used that much, except by countries that already were doing it. So another missed opportunity. So I think anyway, that's basically a quick overview of our thoughts on the matter. And I will hand over to the rest of the panel.
Thank you. I will immediately give the floor to the panelists for a reaction if they want. If not, we already have some questions on the Q&A. Maybe, yeah, Nick?
Yeah, sure. It's really interesting. Thanks for presenting this research. I'm happy also to read up on the details. And yeah, in advance, we were asked also to think a bit about can renewables be the energy for the post-growth society that we want, as you opened the debate with. And I would answer to that, yeah, of course. I mean, renewables will be the future of any society in the EU, whether or not we call it a post-growth society. That's clear already. It was said in the plenary as well, that we are already in a way in a degrowth situation, although it's hard to name it and recognize it, and we still have a lot of work to do, because we see around us the growth economy is crashing on its own terms. The debt is rising faster than the GDP, the inflation is rising faster than GDP, so it's not working on its own terms anymore. So advocating for post-growth only equals turning the current crisis into an opportunity to make it a more just transition. It's just recognizing this. And if you look at the reactions to the data that we have seen from you so far, I mean, of course, this year has been a massive year on the energy front in the EU. We have seen changes, but there are still quite some lessons that we can learn. And you also mentioned like long-term, short-term. I think it's only in a moment of crisis that we can also, that's when we have to begin on the long-term solutions, because once it's all over, then suddenly political attention and capital will be elsewhere. So yes, band-aid solutions for energy poverty, but they are alone are not going to be enough. So that's why we just published Why Energy Justice from the EB to discuss the longer-term systemic solutions to the energy crisis, which is actually just exposing an economic system that's flawed. So maybe stress that having 100% renewable energy in the EU is not an ideological idea. It is a calculated reality, which has been done by the Paris Agreement compatible model by scientists, saying that by 2040, technically the EU could have 100% renewable energy. It's not a matter of inventing new things. But the technical possibility aside, the issues are, of course, materials used for this massive investment in renewable energy, the land use, the ownership that you mentioned, and I will get back to that a little bit, and the levels of energy justice in the whole system. That was already mentioned in the plenary as well. Because renewable energy, renewable technology, it cannot come at the expense of biological diversity or causing involuntary displacements, as happens right now under the banner of a topic which is green extractivism. That's a thing that exists despite us promoting, of course, renewable energy. We don't have to be blind for this existence as well. So let's just take a step back at the whole system. If you look at the system, you have decarbonization as an opportunity for decentralization, because fossil fuels are concentrated in specific places, while renewables, they are more available in many more locations. So there is an opportunity for decentralization, and that's an opportunity for democratization. And are we even seeing the full potential of that? I think that's also already been mentioned. There is like so much more potential for energy communities, but not only for them. Because I think we're still a bit stuck in this theoretical assumptions about the way our economy needs to function, like Philippe Lambert mentioned about the perfect functioning of the market. That's still our theoretical assumption, or at least not ours, but in society in general a lot. But these old assumptions, they are proving themselves wrong through this crisis, very much. So we have to use that opportunity, because Already we see that 1 in 3 Belgians is no longer willing now to pay energy bills. That's what they mentioned in a recent survey. We have public demonstrations where people come with their energy bill and just burn them. So that's like really in Italy, I think.
Yes.
There's a social contract that's being broken. That's the wall that we are hitting. So let's do something more radical than just band-aid solutions. I'm part of a 100% renewable energy cooperative in Belgium, EcoPower, since ever I pay energy bills. And this year was really striking to me because it's not only the greenest energy in Belgium, 100% renewables, it's also the cheapest this year. However, they have one big issue. They couldn't take any new clients this year because new clients means new windmills, because they only work with windmills. And new windmills means you need to have permits. And then you have a government in Belgium that's not giving permits, where they had, like, for example, a project with 6 windmills and the experts all approved it, but there was a political game. And then they didn't get the permit for their windmills, and so no new customers. And this same party is then complaining that the green dogmas are making the bills of energy so high for the people while actually sabotaging. But I'm getting into Belgian politics. That's maybe not my role here. But so yeah, I mean, getting a permit for a windmill in Belgium is so complex. Just one more thing on that. I mean, it makes me think of our world record in Belgium of forming a government. We beat Iraq. So we have to maybe do something on that front as well. And more broadly, if I go back to Europe now, we have Article 22 of recitals of the Renewable Energy Directive, which states that member states must ensure participation in renewable energy communities is accessible to all consumers. So that's not the case clearly in Belgium in the EcoPower case, including those in low income or vulnerable households, so that they can benefit from green, cheap electricity. Many member states have not yet implemented RED II regulation. So there is a clear, obvious political opportunity that needs to be implemented at the national level. But however, I must say that when it comes to oil rigs, big fossil fuel infrastructure, no community is ever going to crowdfund to buy an oil rig and phase it out. That's too big for them. So then I have 3 questions for you, for the audience. Like, do you think that the market is capable of adequately internalizing all the environmental social costs related to the extraction and burning of fossil fuels? Is the market capable? I see the gentleman already saying no. That's pretty obvious, I think. Now, second question, imagine that we know that a fast enough phase out of the fossil fuel sector is a kind of existential matter. It's because we have a certain carbon budget. So where in the whole value chain, from extraction to selling to burning, does it make most sense to intervene somehow? Just also one thing on that, note that once a drop of oil is taken out of the ground, it will always be burned someday. Humanity is not storing oil that it has extracted in tankers for eternity. No, it's burning it. So if we can agree that more market intervention is going to be needed to phase out fossil fuels at the extraction level, last question, who needs to take the lead on that? Is it the consumer at the pump? Is it the private company? Or is it the authorities? And I think it's another rhetorical question. If it's not rhetorical, just read the paper. It will be rhetorical. Because if we need authorities to intervene at the extraction level, then we need a whole other set of policies than the ones that we are usually discussing in the European bubble, actually. We need a few things to make it possible that governments do what's needed at the extraction level, at the source of the problem. And a few things, 3 things that they do, and then I stop, and then I leave it to others to comment. They need to feel pressure from us that this is needed, the bottom-up pressure from society. That's why I support Extinction Rebellion, Just Stop Oil, all the movements in the Gelande who are out there signaling to us, like, I mean, if you're not doing it, we're taking things in our own hands because the science is telling us that this is needed. And then there is other science saying that direct collective disruptive action is actually having the most chance to change policy. And that's actually needed in the face of the challenge of climate that we have. What they also need is someone to unchain their handcuffs. Because governments also in the EU, they have been handcuffed for long. And just now, in the last few weeks, a very inspiring development, somebody is slowly opening their handcuffs in the Energy Charter Treaty. Because these kind of treaties, they bind governments to not phase out fossil fuels. They cannot close power plants because then they will be sued to the tune of billions, and already 100 billion has gone from states, meaning us, to private companies, because states said, oh, maybe we shouldn't drill for oil in the Adriatic Sea. And then some British oil company says, well, then pay us the profits that we were expecting from that in the next 20 years. So now the Energy Charter Treaty is being abandoned by 7 big countries. And the European Parliament on 24 November said, let's just end this joke, this fossil fuel protection treaty. So that's good news. It's a dead man walking now. It still needs to be killed through a nice funeral with the European Commission. And we're working on that. And then we can rebuild and intervene in the energy sector. And like Naomi Klein also said, no is not enough. Authorities also need the yeses. They need alternative measures of progress, because of course, if you're going to phase out fossil fuel, which is the basis of our economy, GDP will take a hit. But the inventor of GDP also said, like, please, here's an indicator, please don't use it to measure progress in society. That's not the purpose of GDP. So indeed, like, we have the 8th Environment Action Plan with a promise of a beyond GDP dashboard of indicators. We have well-being economy indicators. We have so many work ongoing, but that's important because we need the yeses. We need to measure progress in a better way. And then we can phase out fossil fuels in a sustainable way, I think, and capturing everyone who is affected in that sector. That's, of course, crucial. It will not work if you leave the people working in that sector on the streets. But I have a little comment on that, what that maybe for later, because I probably already said enough. Maybe one more thing. Yeah, one more thing. Just a little one. It's okay. Yeah, one more thing. The last time that somebody in our world region tried out to go all out for neoliberalism and see if that works happened a few months ago, the other side of the channel. It didn't end well, did it? So it's a system that's dying, and we are here to build up the new system.
Thanks a lot. We have to step back a little bit to the presentation because we have some questions from the audience that are more like methodological. So they want to know, for example, about data collection, more details. They want to know, and that was my question as well, what's your definition of welfare in your presentation? So just a few remarks about these 2 aspects, and then we go back to the reactions of the panelists.
Yeah, okay. Indeed, I probably should have been more clear on that, what welfare means exactly here. But and it's quite simple in a sense. I mean, by that we basically mean income. So increases or decreases of income in this model, because of, I mean, it's a relatively simple model in a sense, but it's, yeah, to show income basically. And it's based on so it's based on the 2015 like household survey across the EU, because this is where you can get the most detailed information about sort of the behavior of different individual households. Of course, like by now it's slightly a little bit problematic because it's 6-7 years old. And we've just sort of updated it with modern prices, but in a sense, this is the best, I mean, the most robust way we can do it at this point. Yeah, so there's basically like that. And yeah, just using updated prices from Eurostat, sort of averaged across of 2002, because the prices went up and down. So there's an average price. And compared to this average price of 2021, is how that was found.
Excellent. So another question is from the audience is about the role of saving and conservation, transition away from fossil fuels. So I could probably share this question with all the panelists if you want to react on that.
No, I was thinking that to answer, I mean, the reaction to the presentation of Thorfinn is really, reply to that question is really the same as replying to your questions, because the question you prepared, it's about if renewable energy can be the solution. So can I merge it? Yeah, because in the end, the data that Thorfinn was showing, the conclusion was, okay, we have to focus more on renewable energies. But yeah, which kind of transition based on renewable energy shall we push, or what are the also what are the conditions and the limits of a transition based on renewable energy? So I'm a sociologist. I'm working on energy transition the last 5 years. I can bring the perspective of environmental sociology to this issue. So a great deal of sociology working in the energy transition has focused on conflicts around renewables. Conflicts have exploded since the beginning of 2000, linked to renewable energies through a model of an ecological modernization approach aimed at minimizing the cost and maximizing the energy efficiency. The literature, sociological literature on conflicts, consider them as a learning process, as political instances through which the limits and the condition for a sustainable transition are defined. And what characterizes what is in common in the literature on conflict over renewables is the critique of the NIMBY explanation of this vision of the public as moved by selfishness and irrationality. The analysis of conflict highlights that rather than selfishness, very often these movements are moved by social and cultural factors concerning the relationship with social and political institutions. In particular, this literature stresses how feeling of justice and fairness rather than selfishness are among the determining factors. This highlights the key importance of issues of justice and fairness, distributive justice and procedural justice. The energy transition is very much should very much link to issues of distributive justice and procedural justice. Distributive justice, of course, probably you know, has to do with the distribution among groups of social groups or among territories of costs and benefits. And here, of course, there is a rich literature on the just transition, stressing that often the distribution of cost and benefit regarding renewable energies is unfair. We can think about the opposition between rural areas where most of natural resources are, but that are also the most vulnerable to processes of colonization versus urban area, or the south of the world where all the rare minerals and needed for our transition are located, or the middle classes versus the disadvantaged groups and or the ethnic minorities, the indigenous group. But also procedural justice is important. This has to do with the adoption in the planning of renewable of a fair fair participatory decision-making process, able to guarantee all the stakeholders the information and the possibility to express their opinion. And here the literature stress that very often the development of renewable energy infrastructure, the attempt to involve the local population in this planning is of poor quality. In some cases, energy infrastructure are built without information or just with small information without real consultation. Moreover, there is a top-down, technocratic risk communication strategy which dismisses the risk perception by population as unfunded. So a transition based on renewables need to seriously consider justice issues. In addition, there is also the issue of territory. A just transition based on renewable need to be territorialized. two main way of conceiving the spatial relating to space dimension of the energy transition are dominant in the technical discourse. The one see the space of transition as a backyard dominated by selfish opposition. The other see the place as sites to be developed with technical characteristics like the annual wind speed or the proximity to electricity grid. What the sociologist of the territory stresses that is very important to acknowledge that the location for renewable energy sources are not just sites with topographical or archaeological or ecological features, but are also places with symbolic and territorial elements. Attention needs to be given to issues on local identity, place attachment, and the way technology for renewable energy disrupt these social elements. An approach, a territorialized approach to renewable energy should not aim at the social acceptance of technology, but rather are finding way in which the technology can be well fit for the spaces of the transition. A territorialized energy transition means also to give attention to the relationship between local and non-local actors in order to favor action and intervention in closing the energy cycles or at shortening the energy supply chain. So it's also an approach that aims at technology of human size, as Illich said. Community renewable energy has been mentioned also by Thorfinn as a possible solution, and also by Nick as a possible solution. Community renewable energy has some elements that can favor can solve some of the problematic nodes I highlighted before. For example, the co-ownership of the plant, the participatory decision-making process based on one member, one vote, in principle can favor a more just and democratic energy transition. However, I think that it's very important to scrutinize with attention the way in which the new directive, RED II directive, is transposed into national legislation, and to evaluate whether citizens will be able to maintain the autonomy space that is dedicated in the European directive, or to see whether businesses will repropose a model of maximization of profit. Indeed, what we witness in many countries, in particular in Italy, where I'm based, but not only, is that private actor in the form of, for example, energy utilities are kind of colonizing this field. They are offering to, for example, build the plant, so to keep the ownership of the plant, because in the new directive, the ownership of the plant is not necessary of the citizen. So this is a kind of colonization. And also, I've seen this the using of community renewable energy as a kind of social washing by industries. It's a few weeks ago that I heard that the National Federation of Italian Industries made an agreement with a national environmental association that agreed to have community renewable energy as a compensation for big renewable energy plants. So this is another way of colonizing a field that goes against the democratization of the energy transition. Moreover, we have to be careful and evaluate with attention the way in which the profits that in any case also community renewable energy are making are distributed, and also to the structure of the governance that is implemented. Moreover, there is the problem that many projects of community renewable energy lack diversity concerning to gender issues, for example, but also poor disadvantaged group. They are an elite club in many cases. Finally, in order for community renewable energy to be a real place for a social transformation, energy community must be taught as something more than prosumption and as something more than economic actor able to exchange energy. The new directive acknowledge community renewable energy as an economic actor. But I think that is important to consider community renewable energy as also as a democratic cell, a democratic space with the task of socially redefining a fair level of energy consumption, and thus to educate citizens toward sufficiency rather than efficiency. But this is something that we should push now, and we should also scrutinize with attention the new development of energy community. Finally, in regard to energy community, a node that has not been addressed is the one of the ownership of the grid and of the distribution network. Many say that a real democratization should pass through the ownership of the infrastructure of the grid, should be localized and controlled at the municipal level. This is something that has remained still untouched by the Renewable Community Energy Directive.
Thanks, Natalia. What can we learn from your intervention is that there is no dichotomy, no divide between fossil fuels and renewable energies, meaning that we can have different kind of renewable energy infrastructures, and some of them, unfortunately, could replicate and reproduce the hierarchical and extractive setting of fossil fuels. So we really have to focus the attention on the outcomes of the energy transition, because these outcomes are not neutral in terms of empowerment possibilities for communities and for workers as well. And now I come to another issue which refers to the role of social movements in making energy justice and social justice convergent, while deconstructing the negative effects that energy transition could have on society and especially on the labor market. So what role social movements can have in mitigating, on the one hand, the negative implications of the energy transition on society and the labor market, but also in building the democratic infrastructure that we are talking about when we refer, for example, to decentralized energy systems, to community-based energy model. Is there a role for social movements? Is there a role for trade unions as social movement in this connection? And probably, Felix, you are the most competent person to give your opinion on that.
Yeah, vast questions. I will try first to react quickly on a few points. First, I want to start with maybe a positive note of the energy price crisis that we have, is that I've never heard so many people in my family or friends talking about energy, talking about what is a kilowatt, how much costs a kilowatt, function the energy market and how prices are defined on the European energy market. This is something we were dreaming about a few years ago to get people interested to that, and maybe that's in all the negative aspects of the crisis, maybe one positive thing that will help us to achieve the climate transition. So I just wanted to help with this positive note. No, on the negative side, the energy price crisis affects the workers in several ways. First of all, it's a cost of living crisis for everybody because the bills are increasing. And at the same time, it puts at risk the jobs of many workers, especially those in the energy intensive sectors. Some of you might think, okay, maybe it's actually good because energy intensive sectors are emitting a lot of carbon, etc. So maybe it's a way to do the transition. But I want to stress that in order to manage the transition, to build the windmills, the solar panels, to renovate our buildings, we will need a lot of steel, cement, aluminium, etc. And so we absolutely need to keep those industries in Europe because we want to transform them, not want to destroy them. And we want to keep the quality jobs that are associated to them. When it comes to the impact on the households, for us, I broadly agree with the solutions that you presented in your presentation. It's also important for us to very much target the support that we give to people in order not to simply disseminate the resources and the budget that we have collectively, especially since we are now in a phase where borrowing money costs a lot more. And I take again an example from Belgium because you used a few of the cases there. At the beginning of the energy price crisis, Belgium offered €100 voucher check to everybody who owned an energy contract. Whether or not you had a flexible energy contract, whether or not you had a swimming pool and 3 houses, you were benefiting from this. I think it's a perfect example of what policymakers shouldn't do. And we still need to be very active at European level, at national or at regional level there. Another element also you mentioned the green taxes and environmental taxes. I think those taxes are great to provide incentives to people to modify their behavior and send signals to them. But I remain a bit skeptical when it comes to financing the entire transition with those kind of taxes. Because first of all, those taxes, if we manage the transition, they won't be sustainable because they will be phased out. And so what do we do with our national budget and how do we finance our public services? And yes, second of all, those taxes have strong regressive distributional effects. So we need to also look at capital taxation. And I make the link with what was said earlier today. I had noted a lot of things I realized, so I won't be too long. But yeah, on the question of what the trade union can do and what is our vision to achieve the transition, etc. I think the core concept that we have is that, first of all, there are no jobs on a dead planet, and we need to start from that. It sounds trivial, but the trade union movement realized, I think maybe a few decades ago or a decade ago, that we need really to tackle the climate crisis first, because otherwise afterwards there won't be any quality jobs. And I take the example of construction workers or agricultural workers. If they have to work outside under a temperature of 35 degrees, it will simply kill them after some time. So that's the first point. And how to make the transition, for us, the concept of just transition is key, and probably you've heard it over the recent years. Basically, we want to provide quality jobs, and we want to support those regions and sectors that will be affected by the transition, because either they will be phased down at some point for the fossil fuel industry or transformed. And we want to provide adequate support through industrial policies to develop alternative quality jobs in those regions that will be affected. And in this transition, it's also a way to be more inclusive, to include in the labor market also women, people from different ethnic backgrounds that are not always part of the energy intensive industries, for example. We also want to see solidarity mechanism in place between those regions, sectors, or people that will benefit from the transition and those that will lose. And for us, the governance is key in this debate, and we want especially social dialogue and collective bargaining to be at the center of how we transform our companies and sectors. What we would like to see is that trade union representative and employer representative negotiate collectively just transition plans for their companies to agree on how do we get to climate neutrality by 2050, and how do we get there by keeping the quality jobs and ensuring a fair redistribution. And maybe to conclude, I want to state the evolution. In the past, unions were used to oppose the motive of profits and were in opposition with capital, frontal of opposition with them. And the question was how to share the revenues generated by growth, etc. This was kind of a legitimate motive to be in opposition to the profits made by the capital. But now the context has changed, and we are in a confrontation with a moral imperative, which is to go towards climate neutrality. And therefore, we need to embrace that change towards climate neutrality. But the solutions that we will find to achieve that are taking place in a capital versus labor aspects. And this is where I think trading and dialogue are quite important. I hope I wasn't too long or destructured, but happy to answer.
Yes, from the audience.
I think in Denmark, we've seen recently a very big proposal from the pension funds, partly controlled by the unions, to put up, I think it's 5.2 gigawatt of windmill in the North Sea. So there you have a very big proposal that's generating a lot of electricity, but very centralized, and you have the support by the unions, and then the small projects we have that are decentralized and democratically controlled. The pension funds are not interested in these projects because the profit is too little and the projects themselves are too small. So what are your thoughts on this? I mean, on one side, we have a necessity of a more democratized energy system. But on the other hand, when we're also in a hurry, and now we have a business case that's so profitable. So we see big capital going into renewables. I mean, it's not a very clear question, but it's should we fight against this big capital going green? I mean, basically that's what we want. The problem is we will also get a continuation of an energy system that's controlled by capital.
If I may react, I mean, I think it's not an or question. Sometimes we have to do both. As long as the big investment doesn't really harm communities. Again, like I very much agreed with Professor Natalia's input, and we see indeed so many vulnerable communities being hit by such big projects. But when it comes to who owns that, I would challenge the idea of like having that under a private ownership. Why can't the labor union side with the government to invest in such a massive projects in the North Sea? Because we have seen like excess profits in the gas and oil industry of 2,000 billion more than last year, meaning 4,000 billion, meaning a lot more than whatever excess profit tax we're trying to recover from. It's the difference is huge. And that means that we are still having in a system where the poor are paying the shareholders. And we shouldn't, like the moderator mentioned, like just replicate this model in the renewable energy industry, because the resentment and the inequality is gonna keep increasing. So I'm not against big renewable energy projects in the North Sea that don't harm communities per se. But why can't like the government then step in and invest in such a project? Because then you have more opportunity for democratic control, and you don't need to redistribute what has been misdistributed in the first place through a weak excessive profits tax. the distribution by design already from the beginning. And I think energy is such a crucial sector in our economy. Why are we still leaving it like to the private sector to deal with that? I think the lessons from this year should be clear. Like, as long as we keep like seeing that sector as a sector where profits can be made from the consumers of energy, and we all need energy, then we're always going to run behind the real solutions. We're always like one step behind. So I don't know if that fully answers your question, but just some thoughts on it. It's not fully, but
I want also to react to your comment because shareholder activism by trade unions, it's an ongoing process. I mean, trade unions themselves are learning, especially in Europe, on how to engage in this new form of collective action. Pension funds should guarantee fiduciary duties for their members. So there are small attempts toward more sustainable investments by pension funds. But the important thing is that we have also very good practices and cases of pension fund investing from fossil fuels or from big scale renewable project and investing in small scale renewable project exactly to promote that kind of localized system of energy production. So there are probably negative cases, but also positive cases that we should highlight. And I think this is a very important area of action for trade unions. Of course, many pension funds are established together with the employers associations. If I think about sectoral pension funds, I mean, the structure governance of pension funds, it's not only on the hands of unions, so there should be some forms of compromise. And there is this important issue of fiduciary duty that basically does not allow to invest in any kind of activity. So any kind of investment should have a return. But there are good examples also of a good combination between returns and investing in ethical or yes, more forms of democratic systems and democratic economies at a local level. Another question from the audience, then I have to go to a couple of questions from the Q&A in the Zoom.
And both of us go, but you can go first.
Yeah, just.
Okay, well, I'll try and be quick. I'm gonna bring the idea of post-growth that is that was brought up previously, and transition. We talk about transition as in moving away from a carbon-intensive energy sector. And as the panelists have mentioned, there are some impacts of the renewable energy. And even if we call it renewable, we know that it's not infinite, right? We need things to make it function. So with this perspective, knowing that energy, whatever energy it is, has a consequence on our livelihoods, should we not be focusing the attention on what energy we use? And you mentioned we need energy. Well, a lot of energy that we use is not the energy that we need. We're using energy in a way that is very inefficient. And before we get into like detailed policies, should we not kind of take a step back and be like, well, all this energy, we should not be using this way, given we know it's a finite resource and it has so many consequences on people's livelihoods. And I just want to also make the association between transition. It seems that we're transitioning into something which is ideal, but for some people, or for most of us, it's transitioning from one planetary boundary to another, right? We're just putting more pressure on biodiversity loss. And at this moment, the COP is happening on this topic. So it's just kind of, how do we define a common ideal? How do we define the key focus that we should be looking at this in?
Yeah, probably I would like to add to your question and your comment, two of the questions they are strictly related, and then I will give the floor to the panelists after moving Okay, so you,
cannot
there is another
Very related to
yeah.
this. So my question were but very short is like which kind of policies do you advocate first? Is for the consumers, for the industry, like which type of industry? Because we need like a regulate the consumption, but where do you advocate first? And related to that, do you think the wealthier households will change their consumption mode? If not, I think the tax of the wealthier houses that if the more impact will be enough from my point of view, reacting to what Felix said. To that question, do you think, and it's very related, what do you say, do you think there is a need of sobriety in the consumption in general? Like the policies going to a sobriety mode, no, not a consumption mode.
Is the other question from the audience linked to these issues? You raise your hand.
It's more on energy communities, so maybe we can
Okay, go
wrap
back
up with this one.
to that. And I just wanted to add two questions from the audience online that really point to these contradictions that also come from flow from your questions. The main one is refers to colonialism, but not at the local level in Western countries and industrialized countries, but forms of colonialism that the energy transition could imply towards the global south. So as long as we need to extract minerals, natural resources, also to fuel the energy transition away from fossil fuels towards the renewables, how can we resolve these contradictions? Could energy saving and energy consumption be a way of reducing the actual use of energy, also to have a less negative impact in terms of externalities towards the global south? So this is another set of questions that are to be discussed. Okay.
I love to start if that's okay. Less energy use, yes, of course. That's like our first demand, actually. We need to halve energy demand by 2030 in EU, and we can do that. Because indeed, energy affluence is really tackling energy poverty. Because the energy affluent are also rising the prices for everyone. Their demand is, and indeed, renewable energy is not just like eternity forever. You need materials. And we see already the European Green Deal now has a projection of the lithium demand by 2050. It's multiplied by 60. Where is it going to come from? And then we go to the global south and colonialism. It's going to come from the so-called Democratic Republic of Congo. It's going to come maybe even from the Taliban in Afghanistan. If they manage to extract the lithium, sell it to China, and China sells it to us, that's where it's going to come from. That's a new form of colonialism. So indeed, if we don't have the demand, we will not solve our problems. And we are now seeing this year, like it was mentioned in the panel, was a year ago, it was considered like impossible, like a commission asking for energy demand reductions. And now we are at 15% reduction demand. Suddenly it is possible. And there are even bigger demand reductions in Belgium. Right now, it's 25% less than November last year for the gas. So it is possible. It's like with Corona, we also figured out suddenly things are possible that we consider to be impossible. But there is political will needed, and there's a trajectory needed, and then hard work needed. It's not going to come from its own. We can't just rely on the energy effluent chipping in and heating their pool a little bit less. Or we can't rely on Macron kindly asking Total Energies to maybe pay a bit of a contribution. No, we need stronger things. You know, it's so ending energy poverty. Two things are crucial: the excess profits and the energy affluence need to be bought. That's for me clear. How to solve this colonialism? Well, we have in EU legislation on going on due diligence. That's one thing. Another is CBAM, the Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism. There are many discussions where, it's not yet there, but I mean, it's not impossible to imagine. At one point, it's really hard for extracting dirty lithium from the DRC. But at this point in time, it's still quite possible an outcome of our unchecked demand that this is going to happen. So we can't replace all the cars in in Europe, either with electric cars, that would be a disaster. I mean, that would be a complete disaster. Like if we're gonna try to meet the Tesla class in Europe everywhere, that's just physically impossible. And the communities, I mean, if you talk about just transition, are we talking only about country level and trade unions and factories, or are we also talking about justice for all these communities who are now Portugal lithium mining, Serbia lithium mining? They are all, there is an atlas of environmental justice with 3,000 environmental conflicts in the world, and they are increasing because of the demand for materials for renewable energy. So these questions need to be asked, and that's, we have a big project in the EIB on exactly that, understanding green extractivism. And this report is just the first of 4 more coming. So stay tuned.
Any other reaction?
I
Specific issue?
Nick talked about the need to modify energy demand, energy consumption. So sociology has worked a lot on consumption, and I stress that consumption is not rational. It's not even open, modified on the based on information, just information. It's not sufficient to inform consumer of how much they are consuming and the impact it has on the environment, and the modification of behavior. Especially energy consumption is something that is really is invisible. First of all, it's not like going to the supermarket, the small supermarket, buy sustainable food. Food is something we can touch, we can smell. Energy is something, especially fossil fuel energy, is something very distant from us. It's something invisible, it's something very routine. And so we don't really reflect on energy consumption normally, no? At least we just live our life, we make the shower, we eat the apartment, we bring our children to school. So consumption is very much embedded in a variety of social practices. And in these social practices, there is very much also of convention. There are conventions about comfort. For example, comfort is 21 degrees in the room. So these are social elements that are very difficult to change, and that need to be changed with changing, for example, acting on convention of comfort. Acting also on infrastructure, because of course, if we think about mobility, it's not sufficient to have a bicycle at our disposition if then I have to bring my children very far from my home. So there's a need for infrastructure, and there's a need for taking into account of the conventional elements.
Do you think that closing the gap between production and consumption of energy could be a way?
Of course, I think that community energy can be a learning space where also social practices change, because community energy has also a normative dimension, no? The fact that I'm part of a community means that also social capital is created, so there could be stigmatization of my behavior if I behave badly. So this situation can create a space for changing behaviors.
Okay, so let's stick to this issue and I go to Felix. I would like you to know a provocative question on the audience online, which is also linked to your idea that it's important to keep jobs and the industry in Europe. So the question is, should we have lithium mining in Europe to help us go faster to electric vehicles?
I'll answer this one, but first I want to answer on the question on the whether or not taxation on wealthier, the consumption of wealthier households could be helpful. I think in the very short term, yes, you will have probably a lot of revenues out of it, but wealthier households are also usually the one able to think the more rationally, economically, and to make the investments. So quickly they will buy heat pump, they will buy electric vehicle, which is a virtuous circle per se, but it will not bring additional revenues for a long time, I would say. So that's why I'm a bit cautious with these green taxation as a way to finance a lot of things. I think it's often overestimated. And in the end, this taxation, once the rich households have the transition, it will fall on the shoulders of those that were not able to. So on the question of sobriety and consumption, sobriety and post-growth, yes, of course, energy savings and sobriety are a huge part of the solution, and we should promote it. Personally, I think we need also to rethink the way advertising is made, because it creates a lot of time false need for people. And we are in a system where people are negotiating for higher wages in order to buy things they don't need. So I think those discussions about working time reductions instead of higher wages are a huge debate. And I think probably the trade unions in the future should focus probably more on the pouvoir de vivre, like living power, rather than purchasing power. There are a lot of discussions internally in some trade unions. It's not yet, it has not yet percolated in all the trade union movements. But again, on this issue of post-growth, I think you have to look at the trade union movement as a very lively democratic movement. Our position that we develop and we defend at ETUC are coming from our basis, and we have a strong connection with the ground, which is, I think, the richness of our movement. And I see many people, many young people in the room here today. I think my ETUI colleague can correct me if I'm wrong, but the average age of a trade unionist is probably 49 or 50 years old, something like that. So if you want to also change the positioning of the movement, I would encourage you to join a trade union and to be part of the movement, because there are really opportunities to shape it from the inside. And that's really something that I can experience myself. So it's a call for you also to join a trade union, and you can also act through this. By the way, it will also help you having on average, I think it's 10% higher wages and also better working conditions. So
Of course, don't let anyone leave before you.
there are four at the end of the room. But yeah, and then on the question of, and by the way, the discussion on degrowth that we had, or post-growth that we had in this morning, I can see already that many of the solutions that were the concrete solutions that were proposed by the speakers, many of them are already in our positioning at ETUC. If you look at our Congress documents, our position. So I don't think we are that far from each other on this. And the movement has been integrating these slowly, but trade unions are also quite pragmatic, and they want to see the changes on the ground. So sometimes when a Polish miner comes and he's facing the face down of his industry, it's normal that he wants concrete solution. And yeah, sometimes you cannot come with the post-growth debate as an argument. And on the question on the lithium mining, I think we need to ask ourselves how it's produced right now. It's produced in countries where the environmental conditions and the social conditions are absolutely are the worst. And it's a bit hypocritical from our side to go and find our lithium there, and we don't see it, and it's fine. So at some points we need also to try, and I think the Commission is trying to do that with the critical raw material strategy, to try to, yes, develop mining in Europe, also for our strategic autonomy, not to depend from autocratic regime, but do it in a way that is both environmentally sustainable as much as possible, and socially sustainable when it comes to the working conditions of the workers, etc. But fully agree that we won't be able to explore lithium forever, and we need to have some sort of sobriety in the way we consume. That would be my answers.
From buying power to living power.
Yeah, I think it's a
slogan of a next trade unions campaign.
It's already the slogan, for example, if you go to France, the CFDT is advocating for the pouvoir de vivre. So it's already percolating in some movements. And, yeah.
It's a droit de vivre. The right to life, not a power. It's a right.
Yeah, it's a right, but it's a
Thanks.
Right to work, right to be housed, to have a roof. Of course, the first right of all rights, right to live.
Yeah, I think it's a matter in the French translation that
No. A right is a right, and droit, and the translation is exactly the same, and the meaning is based on the Declaration of Human Rights.
on the
And all the evolutions that have been added as the society has evolved, but the rights have been stabilized, fixed, not always defended.
I agree on.
Let's go back to institutions.
Yeah, no, just I work with energy communities in Greece and Brussels, and I did my master thesis on energy communities and degrowth. So I'm very geeked out and happy that every one of the panelists mentioned energy communities. I did not expect that. And indeed, you know, Nick, going back to what you said, we have cooperative producers and suppliers like Enercoop in France, EcoPower in Belgium that shield consumers from price hikes. It's amazing. It's the same in Greece. We have collective self-consumption. You know, you're completely shielded from the capitalist market. And Natalia, I completely agree. You know, the social aspects. I think energy communities can be small schools of democracy. Like, you know, we have get-togethers in my community in Athens, and we talk about ecofeminism and post-growth. So it is about actually the social relations. To get to the question, Thorfinn, I would be extremely excited to see, because, you know, you wrapped up the presentation and you said that energy communities can, what we said, shield, especially vulnerable households from energy prices. Do we have data on that? Or is there like, you know, a prediction to actually look into that, maybe in collaboration with EcoPower or a European study, like with other countries as well?
I don't actually know of like a study or anything at the moment. I think it's more anecdotal from my side, but I do know that many people have commented. I mean, we commented here on the panel that this is has been an effect, that it shields people. That was not their design, but it has shielded consumers from the price rises. And I've seen papers mentioning this as an issue, as sort of an unexpected, I don't know, benefit or whatever you want to say from communities, and that this could be a way just to expand politically the argument for the communities right now. But in terms of a study or something, I don't know, but it would definitely be interesting.
But I mean, the IEPP is not planning to do that immediately in the short.
At least there's no immediate plan, but we're always open to ideas. So yeah.
May I add something about slavery? Nobody should be entitled to control, supervise, monitor whatever we do with our wages. We work for them, we get the money because that's the contract we have signed by both parties, and that's all. We don't, whatever we buy or not buy or is nobody's business. Okay.
Any reaction to this comment? Yeah, it's complex actually.
No, it's very clear.
No.
And you better all of you get it into your mind, because that's the weakest link, the weakest point through which our lives could be controlled, our wages, our work, valued or recognized or not, or whatever we do. Okay, I think we are free citizens. We are born free, and we have rights to work, to be housed, not to be beggars, not to be slaves. Nobody has to put his nose into what we do or what we know.
On the other hand,
Wages is just our passport to our living, everyday living, because that's how it is requested from us and from those who pay the wages. It's just a means. Money,
Can I react?
that's all.
Yeah.
It's
mean-
clear there, it has to stay clear. Beware of slavery.
Thanks. Can I react to that? So yes, I fundamentally agree with you. Like, let's not like control consumers too much. However, I mean, think of the example now popping in my mind, like flights. There is 1% of people who step on a plane who cause 50% of all the flight emissions. These are people who take flights like we change our underwear.
It's not the
Every day.
people, it's the fuel the
Yes.
planes are using,
Yes.
which is going to be changed now with all the regulations.
It's not always an alternative
Not the
fuel for a plane.
You
So
prefer to
I'm-
ground the plane, to land it, and people
Can
walk
I
over.
make my point before we just, so we now have a situation where we have frequent flyer cards. People are like given a card when they are flying a lot, they get benefits. I'm proposing to have a carbon credit card where if you fly more and more and more, it's going to get harder and harder, more expensive until in the end your carbon budget is gone because you are taking the budget from the other people away and you are harming the others. That's slavery.
Not the
I don't know.
It's
a
the
little
fuel
limit.
using, and they're going to change all that because it's going to be an obligation. It's not the people.
I'm just saying there is such thing as energy affluence, and there is a paper like scientists warning on affluence, and they cite like we cannot solve our climate change issue if we don't tackle affluence and the affluence consumption. So if there is a way, for example, with flights to address overconsumption, which is harming a lot of other people, and there is a simple technical way to do it, I'm saying that we should maybe investigate
Stop the
that.
flights or stop using the fuel that is more polluting, which is something that is being done by regulating now.
There is no biodiesel that's better.
I didn't speak of biodiesel. I said that they are changing all the standards for the permits for the use of XY fuel, especially in aviation. So don't worry, just focus the fuels and let the people take their holidays, especially if they're cheap. After 3 years, they could
Holidays.
with the COVID thing and whatever, and no money in the pocket and not knowing where we're going and not being capable of using certain flight zones just because there are wars everywhere near our door.
Bella, if you want to.
Well, I think we just got it, this debate, but just to remind that freedom has limits. I mean, we have learned it in many ways, and of course there is the public interest. Here we have planetary boundary. In the COVID crisis, we saw that there were moments when you were not even allowed to go into the street, and that has that reason. And there is a debate in Germany, an everlasting debate about the speed limit. I mean, the argument is that you have the freedom to ride like 200 or whatever on the motorway. And yeah, I mean, there are ways to well, have an effect on behavioral change. So you are in a way free because nobody, I mean, once you spend your money for, but there is an open way to change your behavior.
Bella,
Yeah, anyway, but I think.
people, passengers are not the owners of the company. Okay, they don't make money flying, they have to pay, unfortunately.
Hey, so the time is over. It was a fascinating discussion. So thank you very much to the panelists, the audience at home. And yes, enjoy the rest of the conference. Thank you very much.
Walk home. And don't breathe.
Sure.
But there's enough.